All right, awesome. Dave, PhD in theoretical and applied mechanics, right?
Hmm.
You're running point on some really important things like running operations at United Airlines. And now, as I understand, you're applying airline yield management principles to the automotive dealership. So something that is often understood to be entrenched in like everything from behavior at the local level with dealerships, how they deal with vehicles, how they deal with people, their staff, etc. And you're bringing some principles that probably would seem disruptive. Coming in to basically say, hey guys, you might be doing what you're doing well, but look, we can do it better. Let's hear about it.
Yeah. Oh, great. Yeah. Thanks for having me in here. So yeah, we're building EvenFlow AI, which is, as you kind of hit upon, a resource optimization SaaS product for automotive dealerships. And that resource optimization focuses on really their fixed operations or their service department. And at the end of the day, or sort of the tip of the spear of our product is scheduling appointments. But that's the mechanism to better match the demand of customers, vehicle service needs with the capacity of the service center, which is anchored on really the technicians who do the work there. So what we're, as you alluded to, is bringing a little bit more rigor and intensity to the shop loading and the capacity optimization. We've got other pricing, like a pricing engine, demand generation, workflow automation features as well. But the core is that shop loading, capacity optimization.
So share a little bit about the story of how you got to this point. Like, what were the touching stones to go from one industry to the next?
So, there's lots of different twists and turns in sort of one's career. I can give you sort of a little bit more of a straight line path, but in reality, it's never quite so, logical or whatever. But, about 14 years ago, I knew I wanted to, I was at United Airlines. I knew I wanted to start my own ventures. I had been something that, I'd thinking about for quite some time. And then I just jumped off the cliff and left United and started my own things. And then, but worked with partners, throughout my experiences. And one of the core themes is taking some of the things that airlines do really well, selling every seat on the plane, and trying to apply it in other contexts. So, like with hotels, golf courses, doctors' offices, surgery centers, and we were kind of near the. I guess we were forecasting we were going to exit the healthcare company soon. We did exit, but it wasn't quite as soon as we thought. But like we were thinking, well, what's next? And it's kind of random, but like we were thinking, financial services, hair salons, like we were all over the map. And I had just gotten out of, getting my car service. I had like a 3 hour oil change, and I was like, this doesn't feel all that optimal. Maybe there's something here. And that kind of just, in a naive way, just sparked a journey of a study and investigation of the space. And eventually, like, we cleared enough milestones that I said, yeah, let's just dive in, and there's an opportunity here, and let's go for it.
So, how do you feel like having that, like the PhD background, like very structured in your thinking? This is not you, like a lot of people that are building with different tools right now, they're not coming through using, AI to sort of solve things. So they pick an industry and then they're coming at it and saying they're becoming experts through leveraging kind of a second order consequence of learning. So it's
Hmm.
you're learning from tools that have learned from people, whereas it
Yeah,
seems
yeah,
like
yeah.
you went through, you have this education layer and then you're in the industry and then from there you're bringing in tools. What is that like?
Yeah, I think, at the end of the day, the PhD experience was the single best training I've ever had in any concept or context. And really, because at the end of the day, with your research, like you're solving a problem that's never been solved before. So it's not like I can go Google something and give me the answer, or go to the library, get a book, right? Like you know, I was heavy into theory, so there was a lot of days I was staring at a white piece of paper and a pencil, and I'm trying to figure something out. And that process of just like grinding through it, working through it, getting stuck, taking another turn, getting stuck, going back, taking another turn, stuck, like just that like mental like agility and like practice of like just learning and trying to solve problems like that stayed with me throughout, and that's probably the biggest skill that I keep using all the time with startups. But I use it any time in the workforce. I'd say my wife probably would say I don't use it enough at home, but definitely in work I use it all the time. So
Yeah, fair enough. And I feel like with my wife as well, a lot of that perspective is constructive criticism in a founded way. There's room for improvement across the board. So I think that if I understand correctly, you guys estimate like a 10 to 25% lift in revenue if you're able to solve this problem well. So, which I think for some would look and be like, wow, that's substantial. Can you like maybe explain it to me like I'm in grade school or something, but like at a really practical level for someone who doesn't understand, this industry, aside from going in and getting something serviced, how would
yep.
you explain how those pieces individually in that process of kind of going through become optimized?
Yeah, and so this goes hand in hand with like why does it matter both to the dealer and the customer? So from the dealer perspective, right? Like over half their profit today comes from service, and that's been a 20-year trend and growing upwards. So it's a critical element of their overall P&L, and then even more, it's they're always under some existential pressure from the car manufacturers of like, do they need this franchise dealer distribution model? But if you think of the buying cycle of a car, or the life cycle of ownership, like the buying part is a sliver of it, right? That might be, a month if you're doing a lot of research. It could be 2 hours if you're just going in, right? And then you might have that car for 10, 15 years, right? And so from the dealership, if they can deliver on a better experience, better customer stickiness with service, right? Then it's adding profit to their bottom line, but it really solidifies them in that distribution chain because they have stickiness with an ownership of the customer there. So that's like really critical. And as much as it's over 50% of their profit, from my analysis of the dealerships we work with, they might get like 60-70% of their revenue potential. And so they're leaving a lot of money on the table there. And then how that plays out in practice, there's more stuff going on here, but maybe just sort of a painting a simple picture is like the current process, they don't control the flow to the demand to the capacity. And so what happens is customers, flood the zone in the morning, and the shop gets overrun, and then there's not enough work in the afternoon, and then the technicians are sitting around idle. So that I call is like spoiled inventory, and that's like in the airline world, that's like leaving the gate. You can't sell that empty seat 30,000 feet in the air. It's a lost opportunity. And same thing with like the technician labor hours. You can't go back in time and bill it. No different than like a lawyer can't go back to yesterday and try to bill time that they didn't bill, right? Like everything is sort of in the moment, and it spoils if you don't use it. So that's one consequence of like the suboptimal part. Then going back into the morning, and this it really gets into where it benefits the customer as well, the consumer. But what happens in the morning is typically when it's overrun is that the dealers, they're just trying to move customers through. They get worried about the backlog customer experience, and they have big incentives on satisfaction surveys. So it's like one survey could cost them like $200,000 in incentives in a month, right? So they're always looking at that upset customer. And so the way they move them on through is that and they're trying to do more cars in the same amount of time. It's physically, you got to do less work, right? So they might say like, hey, Caleb, your tires, the tread's like this, but like you're okay. We'll see you in 6 months. Or your brake pads are almost ready to be replaced, but you're okay. We'll see you in 6 months. So they're just trying to move you on through. And from the dealer P&L perspective, that's like lost revenue, right? Because those services are just being skipped, and so it's like a hidden killer to their profitability because there's things they should have pulled through that they didn't. Now, from the customer standpoint, that you're not doing the customer any favors, right? Because you probably should get your brake pads, replaced for your own safe operation of the vehicle, or helping like sort of maintain the lifetime operation of your vehicle or extending that lifetime operation. So all of it is kind of a system there that like when we get, I say it's like a conveyor belt of work. When we get the demand equaling the capacity, it's all coming in at the right pacing, and then the customers have a better experience. The dealerships say like their days feel easier, but they produce like they set records. And maybe a simple example I'll just and then I'll pause here is like I sometimes think of a restaurant, right? Two restaurants, equally good food, right? One restaurant, you go in and you got to wait 45 minutes for a table. Everything is rushed. The servers are running around. They're arguing with the kitchen staff. You hear dishes breaking. Your server doesn't even tell you what the specials are, and then they don't even offer you dessert and just give you the check and you're out the door, right? Another one is you walk in, you get a table right away. The place might be full, like no table is empty, but the server answers all your questions about the menu, right? Talks about, some specials. Make sure that you get the dessert menu, and like all the courses come out at sort of the right time when you're ready. You've finished and you're having conversation. It's all paced out in the right way. So the food's the same, but the experience is very different, right? And so that's kind of like what we're trying to do is just make sure that the service advisors and the technicians have the time to have the proper conversations with the customers for their own interests of the safe operation of their vehicle and the lifetime management of the vehicle to really pull through the necessary services there.
Mm-hmm. What has the response been like? Whether, depending on your marketing, are you doing outreach? Do you have like outbound versus how much of that response are people finding you online, and how does that conversation pick up with them?
So we get still a lot of word of mouth today. We also have set up some partner channels, and then we do get like inbound, like we do some outbound outreach through social, like LinkedIn or emailing, and then we get inbound from our website. Usually, the inbound is some form of word of mouth, anyways. Like and that's one of the growth challenges that we have is that our customers generally aren't in the market looking for a better tool. They kind of resign themselves to like, this is just how the industry is. And it's kind of like, I have a migraine, but I'll have a migraine for the rest of my life and I just have to deal with it. And so they're not looking for like, the pain relief medication online or anything like that. So they're just kind of accepting that. So we're trying to find ways to engage them to tell them that we've got actually a solution to help, with their migraine.
Yeah, and it seems to me that as the idea of AI is like permeating more and more of society at the different levels of adoption, that more and more people are just realizing, oh, this is really disruptive. They might have seen something else totally unrelated disrupted, and they've logically concluded that our industry will likely or is likely being adopted. I just might not know how yet. And I feel like we've seen that in a few ways where there's a receptivity that opens up and a curiosity, but they may not yet know what product exists or service or vendor but as that kind of continues to push forward, to me, part of the behavior that I would expect are more people reaching to whatever trusted tool they use and asking ChatGPT or Claude or even Google, and then having an answer generated to them where they're saying, hey, what AI solutions, what's happening in this space, and then seeing what surfaces.
Yeah, yeah. I think especially with the dealerships right now, it's like a confusing space, and where I'm trying to weather the storm of the AI confusion. And so, the dealers know that they need to adopt AI in some inherent way, right? Just because it's almost like fear of missing out. The solution that they're gravitating to is like this, more of like an AI phone agent or chat agent, which is, there's real value to that in their operation, because they generally don't have enough staff to basically handle all the inbound outbound sort of contact points with customers. So it's a real valuable solution for their bandwidth. But we're not that. So the market is like really frothy, or like people are adopting that because it's kind of more intuitive. We're more of like an intelligence layer underneath it that optimizes the operation. And so you could think of like analogy is like when we integrate in with those AI schedulers or other part, we're more like the puppet master. We're kind of directing those AI agents really how to schedule appointments, or how to generate demand in a way that's going to optimize the operation. Because and this is just generally true with like demand generation and fixed capacity, right? Like more demand generation may not be better, right? Like you don't want 27 appointments at 8 a.m. because you can't handle 27 appointments, right? You might want 27 appointments, but they have to be where the operation can handle it. And really, we're that intelligence to make sure that like things are getting loaded the way that they should. Because otherwise, like blind demand generation in an operational sense will actually be counterproductive to whatever incremental benefit you think you got from higher repair orders.
So, do you see what you've developed becoming more of the foundational layer, or does it sort of soak into whatever systems already exist? Like, is it replacing a primary platform people are interacting with, or does it sort of run in the background?
It's a bit of both. So, like scheduling the appointments, we're replacing out, and then we become really the booking channel that then all our algorithms are feeding, or our input output, right? But overall, this intelligence layer then is just got like tangles in across the other dealer management system. And so sort of in a traditional B2B SaaS vertical play, we're trying to integrate and surround the core systems to really be the enabler of unlocking value in a way that the core system in a lot of contexts usually is like almost a fixed green screen, like it's handling commodity transactions. It's difficult to replicate, really hard to replace. And so you don't necessarily want to be in that game, I don't think, at least from my perspective. So you just kind of let that be, but then you were surrounding it and then really becoming, the orchestrator of like, as I say, the intelligence layer. And, another way of thinking about it is, this one dealer, like, I quote them all the time because I love this, because, they're private companies, so they don't need to do all the normal, employee ratings. And he's just like, Dave, I just put all my employees in a 2x2 grid. Are they smart, or are they dumb, are they energetic or lazy? And like the dumb energetic ones drive me crazy because they're always running around messing up stuff, and I wish they were lazy. And so I think of that as like, if both for the human and the AI agents within the dealerships, right? Like there's core people that really understand the operation, but it's too vast that they can't make every single decision. And today, like either the AI agents or like the untrained employees that are just running around like the Energizer bunnies, or customer or employees are making independent decisions based on what they think is best, but it's missing the big picture. So what we're trying to do is really be that intelligence layer of like taking that expert of the dealership and making sure that that intelligence is really being pushed down into sort of all facets of the operation. And in that way, like, it's also the firm belief is like it can't just be this LLM probabilistic, machine. It's got to be many different components of it because in an operation you can't just rely on a prediction or a probabilistic, right? Like think of a chemical reaction. I need 2 parts A, 1 part B in order for this thing to work. If I have 2.1 A and 1 B, like I get an explosion. So that's the same thing in operation. There's in some cases there's no room for chance or the probabilistic being slightly off. You got to be precise, and so there's still big room for deterministic or other mathematical techniques that are sort of the right tool for the right time.
Yeah, it sounds to me like what you're doing would be like a chapter in a deeper look at something like Tesla, optimizing a certain aspect of its entire, systematic flow, and how valuable what you're building could be to a single manufacturer, right? So if all of their
Oh yeah, yeah.
dealerships, so I'm curious, I don't know if, you've mentioned, with some of your experience at different levels of companies and whatnot, but if you have a plan in mind, if you have like, if your goal is to work across multiple manufacturers, or if you ideally would find one that would say, hey, we see what you're doing, and create some sort of agreement or potentially partnership and acquisition to say, look, we just want you to work exclusively with, GM, products across the line, or, Ford or something. If that's sort of a path that you've considered or would want.
So I'd say all paths are open, right? Like and this is I firmly believe as like a founder, like you can't shut down any commercial paths or viability, right? If it's something backward looking, like yeah, we're past that, right? But for future opportunities, like I think you've got to evaluate all things on their own merits, and there is that's a possibility of an OEM sort of like saying like this is our capability. There's large dealership groups, a couple of them, are poking around saying like, hey, this could be our secret sauce. We don't want anyone else, to have it. Or it could just become like dealerships are one, segment of the marketplace. In the U.S., that's like $150 billion of repair volume. That's big, but it's part of an overall 400 billion repair market annually. So we could go to other segments like the chains, like Jiffy Lube, or the hundreds of thousands of like independent shops, or go to other international markets, and there's already been some interest there. So there's a lot of different like vectors we could go here, and we're at the stage where I can't close any door down, and all of these things could be pretty interesting depending on the right context of it.
Okay. Well, the last question, and one that I'm, often curious about in any venture I'm looking at, is like, what is the one thing that you would say you need most to grow right now? Is it investment you're looking for? Like, is there a specific part of the bottleneck that you currently have that you're looking to move the needle on?
I would say it's kind of like business intelligence, change management, all wrapped up into one. So, we're you hit upon it earlier, like we're a completely new approach to how people have been doing things for their whole career, right? And so change is hard in any context. A lot of people have accepted that like this is the migraine I'm going to live with, and so they're not thinking it elsewhere. They've also been burned by a lot of other automotive retail software vendors, so they have a low trust of anyone new, because they've been burned a lot of times there. So it's trying to get like sort of over the hump of awareness and willingness to try something. But then it's also part of where I say business intelligence is like part of helping them get over the hump is giving them insights of how to do, look at the world differently. But the challenge is this is a continuous process and you can't set it and forget it. So like we might have it dialed in for your service center and you have 10 technicians and then you call up the next day and say, hey, 3 guys quit. Now what? Right? So whatever the plan was, like we got to have a new plan here. And it's the way I always say it's like a complex problem and we have a complex solution. So there's also risk of it not being deployed correctly. And in maybe a simple way, like think of it, we're like a hammer. Like I could precisely nail this nail in the wall and hang a picture, or I could swing it around and bang some holes in a wall, right? And so without that sort of, our own sort of business intelligence or intelligence layer for the users, we could end up with banging holes in the wall. And so this whole thing of the change management of the awareness, willingness to try something, but then once we do that, to support them as their operation is dynamic in an efficient way and in a smart way, that's like a huge sort of scalability challenge for me, because I could get someone over the hump on like maybe giving it a try, but like if I can't support them efficiently as their business is ever evolving, then I can't go back to the pipeline and get the next person to try it, right? Because then I'm still working with the latest one that I pulled through.
And if I hear what you're saying, you need that revenue, you need that cash flow to sustain that in like a monthly engagement or quarterly or however you have it structured, so that you can deliver a high enough quality experience so that their experience is their testimonial is strong, so that you perpetuate the flywheel in a positive way. Failure to do that. So what I'm hearing is that this is not a trial. Try this for 30 days, you love it, and then you can then engage. So to me, and I'm not an expert in this, but you actually might have, depending on your background and your understanding of the ability to create certain formulas based on what you see, is there might be a little bit of a competitive advantage and some creativity and financing and math to look and see what is that amount of time. Is it 120 days to really see that traction demonstrated? And if so, what is that amount of, what is that hard cost to you versus that revenue? In an equation where you either might fully absorb that if you had the ability to bring on as many clients, if you had enough of a team and enough of the technical capability to just basically remove the cost of acquisition or cushion the cost of acquisition and sort of hold your breath long enough until you can get that. Because if you found that sweet spot where the cost to acquire is like near zero for you, whether it's because of venture backed money that works out with the numbers, and also the risk is near zero, for someone to come in and say, okay, we'll do this. We've been burned before with these other quote unquote AI tools, or other systems that ended up costing us time and frustration and whatever. But if you could find that sweet spot, that essentially you could carve out as much as the market share until you have a competitor at your heels.
Yeah. And I think what you outlined is, a lot of the dynamic I worry about, but I would just modify it slightly in that, a couple years ago, we worked really hard about getting implementation timelines short. So like the industry standard in our space is like 30 days, and we can be up and running in 10 to 14 days. So we've shrunk that considerably. Depending on the nature of the service center, we can actually show results, say week 2, worst case sort of like week 4. If they have a big backlog of work there, so we can show benefits early on. So that part is still is about a bit of the change management there, but where I get hit is more on a month 2, month 3, or month 4 later on, because like I said, their operations are dynamic, and so things change. Like whatever we had locked in, they get a new recall, they get new staffing. There's different, consumer demand changes out in the marketplace, right? All this like is this dynamic thing, and being able to like efficiently keep retaining, and delivering value, is that's the challenge, because we are a new way, and habits are hard to form, and so the service managers generally left to their own devices, they'll go back to their 20-year habit, right? And so they'll start unwinding things, and then we've got to help like keep them, on the straight and narrow here, and that part like is sort of like a real challenge that we do this efficiently on my end.
Yeah, it's interesting, especially if you feel like you have, let's say, a goal to exit 5 years out. If that was the case, I'm not saying that it is, but
Yep.
if you did have acquisition on the timeline that you wanted, what the value would be per client that you have, right? So what is the multiple based on, the value of that? We have this is the size of our book of business. What that multiple might be worth in this industry to either a competitor who is doing similar to you or the same as you, and they're looking, it's actually faster to acquire and then integrate, what you have, versus just compete with you. But if you're also ahead of the market and then a competitor with a worse product, but maybe bigger pockets or a larger book of business that's looking, saying, hey, we know that you've got a better thing, let's not compete, let's work something out. If acquisition and roll-ups are a part of what this industry would see, which I think is rational,
Yep.
it might be worth looking and saying, in a 12-month span, if I need, for that first 30 days to see value, I need 1.5 of my reasonable guys on it, and then for every month past, I need 1 to 2, depending on how many, if you actually could find a way to budget for the 2, across the board, so that you have that an expectation. And then if you had a way to remove the risk for the first 3 months or whatever for someone, or whatever it is, to change the behavior of that manager that might go back to his old 20-year behavior, if you could remove that. So that could be a numbers equation. That might be venture capital. I'm not always saying to do that. We don't have a backing in that, but we've been the M&A partner, in terms of, from a marketing standpoint. We've done over 80 rebrands and helped, as like some of these larger companies, their growth strategy is acquisitions. So we've seen firsthand what happens, how they'll find smaller outfits, bring them in, you merge that brand, you integrate it. But I think that, because you might look at that and say it's actually a visible number, and then you can just concentrate on, I know, because we have this number, I know I'm going to need this amount of staff to grow, for the human in the loop. And then you just are focused on growth this way. We know we can acquire here because it's predictable, there's low risk, and then we're just improving the product in the middle.
It makes a lot of sense, and I think part of that strategy that's always seemed to resonate with me too is the incumbents that got 3, 4, 5,000 customers, right? There is definitely a segment of customers out there that are I'll call it like the happy path, like they're a little bit easier for us, or it's a well-worn path, and like being able to cherry pick like the next 200 or the next 500 that are on the happy path accelerates growth much faster than where we are now. Is like we're trying to drive pipeline, but we can't, beggars can't be choosers, right? So we're taking all comers, and we get some happy path, and we get some new paths that are, got some stumbling blocks here that slow us down a little bit. So that dynamic there has been definitely top of mind here for the last 12 months.
Well, Dave, I really appreciate the talk. I know it went a couple minutes over what you had allocated, but this has been awesome to hear. And it sounds like you're building something that's got a lot of momentum, and is certainly solving a really important problem. So I appreciate that. And thank you.
Yeah, no, thanks for having me on. A lot of fun. Thanks.